All right, I don't know if everybody saw the news the other day. This story is a few days old. This is an updated story that was from February 23rd, but the news broke the Friday prior to that. And that's the news that 19 police officers in Austin, the city of Austin, were indicted due to the way they responded to the riots that occurred in 2020. This is the largest this is the largest number of officers who have ever been indicted out of a single incident in the history of this country. Um, I don't know when I want to get into it, but this is something that sends a very dangerous message to police officers across this country, as well as to the people who are out there writing that mean to do harm to our society. So the story begins saying 19 Austin police officers have been indicted for their actions during the 2020 George Floyd riots, according to documents publicly released Tuesday. The 19 officers were indicted on 2 counts of aggravated assault by a public servant, intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly caused serious bodily harm to individuals, according to court documents. One of the 19 officers has been indicted twice for his alleged action against 2 alleged victims, the court documents show. Then there's a little bit of a back and forth between one of the officers is now running for office, and the prosecuting attorney or district attorney, whatever it is that they call him down in Texas, he ran for office on a platform of punishing police officers. And the one of the officers who was indicted, named twice in the indictment, is accusing the district attorney of doing this to sabotage his campaign. I'm not sure if that's an accurate thing, but I do believe that this indictment is 100% political in nature, and it should never have gone through. That's going to be my take on that initially. So this is the back and forth between them, which I'm not going to read. And this is just him talking about the investigation, which I believe is all kind of bullshit. I don't trust anything that they're saying. Now, there's gonna be a picture that's gonna pop up on the screen. I'm not gonna let it sit for very long because I don't want YouTube to restrict this video. But you know what? I'm just gonna go back up to the top. We're gonna talk about this for a moment. So, what people are saying is that there was, beyond a doubt, a riot that occurred in downtown Austin in 2020, just like a riot occurred in every major city across the country. After a period of time, police officers began responding to these riots and began using force to disperse the crowds. You may also remember that a record number of police officers were assaulted during this time. I myself was standing on line with a lot of these police officers. I was taking rocks and frozen water bottles to my head. I had large-scale explosive devices thrown at me. They were spraying us with unknown fluids. Some people had topical burns on their skin. They were trying to get things in our eyes. This is the kind of things that these rioters were doing. On top of that, they were smashing every freaking window that they could find. They were lighting buildings on fire. If a car drove through the area, they would pull the driver of that vehicle out of the vehicle and beat the living shit out of them. There was a guy in the city of Columbus who was disabled, and he was pulled out of his car, beat up, and his car was nearly destroyed. Something else? Well, before I move on. So, officers had to deploy to these areas, and they were giving people orders to leave. Now, one of the things that officers are being accused of is that they're saying, these lawsuits and these charges are saying, look, we know that there were people in the road that were doing things. We know that there were people who were lighting buildings on fire. But the problem is that you used force against people who were just standing there peacefully protesting. I'm going to dispute that, because if you were in the presence of a riot for a certain amount of time, like I'll go ahead and say this. If there was a protest downtown for some reason, what is a protest that I would go to? And I'm trying to think of something that's not a hot topic political issue. Let's say it was fishing rights. Let's say the governor of the state of Ohio issued an edict that said you can no longer go fishing on public waterways on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. And that caused a large protest. So everybody circled around the state house and they began chanting and holding signs and stuff. And I decided, you know what? I like to go fishing. I'm going to go down and participate in this protest. Now, let's say that I'm down there peacefully protesting on the sidewalk, just like the majority of people are. And then I start to see people using skateboards to destroy bus stops. And I see people start to charge the state house. And they're picking up metal trash cans and throwing them through the windows of the state house. And they're throwing Molotov cocktails into historic downtown theaters. My ass is going to leave because this is no longer a peaceful protest. This is not something that I want to be part of. And that's what I would do as an intelligent human being. The people who continued to stay after officers had given order after order after order, I don't believe those were peaceful protesters. It's not much different than what I saw when I was in Iraq, is that an insurgent 1 minute can just disappear into the crowd, drop his rifle, switch out his shirt, and all of a sudden he's just an innocent civilian. Just like many innocent civilians would be in the crowd, concealing a weapon, and then next thing you know, they're firing an RPG at you, or they're detonating an IED. The people who were down on the sidewalks or whatever when these riots were going on, an overwhelming majority of them were support personnel. They were there with med kits so that they could put stuff in, so they could flesh out people's eyes that got sprayed by mace, and then those people could get back in the fight. Like, this was a war zone. These cities were war zones, and the officers gave hours upon hours upon hours of warnings to these people that they had to disperse. And then when they didn't disperse, the officers began using different tactics. Some of the tactics they used were knee knockers. That's something that was used where I work that we are now prohibited from using. That's when you got this tube and it fires from a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. And inside that is a bunch of wooden dowels, probably 6 or 8 of them. They fly out, they hit the ground, they bounce, and they hit people in the legs and the knees. That's why they're called knee knockers. Unfortunately, from time to time, those things are going to take an odd bounce and they might hit someone in the head and seriously injure them. That's why they're known as less than lethal rounds. They're not known as like non-lethal or anything like that because they still have the potential to cause serious physical harm. The justification for using those techniques is that you give people ample warning before you do. So anyone who might get hit by that stuff has been forewarned that there's force that's going to be used against them. Now, I also want to bring up the fact that this is the reason qualified immunity exists, because these officers were working for the jurisdiction that employs them. They were basically working under the authority of the mayor, and their orders were virtually coming from the mayor, because the mayor of that city is going to say, I don't want my city to burn to the ground. I don't want my business owners to be afraid to go to work in the downtown area. So I want the police to go down and use the approved techniques to remove these people from the streets. When police officers do that, they were acting as an agent of the government, and their actions are not their own, but they are of the government. So if the police, if something bad happens, it's not necessarily that police officer's fault that a knee knocker round bounced up and hit someone in the face. That's the city's fault. That's the police department's fault. It's not necessarily that officer's fault. There were a lot of other things that happened like that with the beanbag rounds and stuff like that. There's also the image that I chose not to show. It was someone that took a beanbag round into the rib area and it went through, and it caused them a very serious injury. It's unfortunate those kind of things happened. That's not the goal of the police officers. The goal of the police officers is to have everybody either peacefully protest or to leave the area. And when that didn't happen, they were forced to respond with non-lethal force. And unfortunately, some people were injured. Now, the message that this is sending is that it's telling every police officer out there that if you respond to a riot and try to prevent rioters from burning down buildings and smashing windows and doing all the things that rioters do, that if you attempt to intervene in that situation, you have a high likelihood that you're going to be criminally charged. So what they're telling officers is do not respond to these situations. So what I'm going to tell you is that if you have a business in the downtown area of any major metropolitan city, that you need to find a new place to be in business, because your business is no longer safe, because the powers that be don't care about your business. They care more about the people who want to destroy your business. And that is a very sad thing. The other part that I want to bring up is what's going to happen if these riots are going on and there are no police, because we saw that also across the country. We had the CHOP autonomous zone. We had George Floyd Square. We had a lot of other places. There was a lot of chaos and murder that happened in those places. I don't know how many people were shot and killed, but it was 20 or something, like in the 20s, that from what I remember. There's also a story right here from Austin itself. This was a guy named Garrett Foster. He brought his gun to a Austin protest, and then he was shot dead. Now, what was he doing when he was shot dead? Well, there was a guy who was driving. He was trying to drive his vehicle on a public street. That's what he was trying to do. And that public street was being blocked by rioters. He turned down one way and realized he couldn't go, and he began to back up, and then somebody screamed that he hit them. These people were acting like he was driving 60 miles an hour. He was going very slow speed. There's video of this all over the internet. So he bumped somebody. And then what does Garrett Foster do? He grabs his AK off of his back, raises it up, and charges at the car. The guy in that vehicle was no dope. He had his concealed carry permit. He chose to draw his weapon, and he eliminated a threat that was running at him. So what you have is a situation where the police were basically told, you're not wanted down here. You're causing more harm than good. You need to get out. So the police officers did that. They dispersed. They weren't in the area. And then you get people that are getting killed. So what would you rather have? Would you rather have police officers that are using beanbag rounds, knee knockers, tear gas, and other kinds of less than lethal ordnance against rioters who are actively destroying buildings and blocking roads and doing all that stuff? Or would you rather have the police officers leave and then you have more Garrett Fosters? Because those are your two options. Situations like this are sending a very clear message. And this is the reason that violent crime has exploded across the country since the summer of 2020. Anyone who doesn't understand this, well, I'm not even going to say that right anymore. Anyone who claims not to understand this is lying. Those are going to be my thoughts for today. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.